Okay, in this video we're going to finish up the multiplication discussion before I make another video for division. I'm going to try and do this as quickly as possible. First of all, we're going to start off with 12 times 4 again. And I've just written down in general what we talked about in class, which was this is 10 plus 2, and each of those two digits, or each of those two values, is multiplied by 4 to get you 40 plus 8. So I've represented 10 and 2 here in the blocks, and I've left a little bit of space. I should actually bring this rectangle closer to this one, just so you can see that that's the whole numbers, and then you have your group of 10 here. And we actually want to multiply all of this by, let's copy and paste, by 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this represents visually what we saw in the arithmetic here. So I've got times 4. So what ends up happening is I have my place value work here of my 1s and my 10s being multiplied by this value of, it's one's place, but being multiplied by a separate value, and so you see the 10s increase and the 1s increase. So let me pause it so that I can come up with the next screen for you, and we're going to build on this idea. So the next problem we're going to go to is going to be somewhat of an easy step up, because we're multiplying a two-digit number again by another two-digit number, but this one has a 0 in the ones place, so we're multiplying by 10. So I did the same structure as before, where you do 20 plus 3 times 10 for each of those two values, and then add them together. But this here should look kind of funny to you. This 3 times 10 with the 3 in the top, that's not the standard. That's not how we usually do this. So let's take a look at another way to write this down. So I can do 23 times 10 plus 23 times 0. So it's like I'm doing the tens place and the ones place multiplication here. So this is 0 and this is 230. And I know that that doesn't look very clear. You know, this one breaks down every part and this one does not. But I do want you to see that the multiplying by 10, there's the tens place digit, and multiplying by 0, there's the ones place digit. It still comes out to the same thing, and then you're ending up sticking with the same algorithm, meaning never writing the smaller number on top, as you've done your whole lives basically. But this is, you know, this is still not exactly giving me a clear picture, so I am going to actually, don't know what's happening, sorry, I'm going to draw this one out as well. So give me a minute. That's gonna, well, I mean, actually, I'm just gonna pause it. Okay, so very quickly, I've got 20 here and then 3 here with the separation, because this is my tens place and this is my ones place. Let me pause it and then multiply this by 10. Okay, so I now have my 23 times 10, and you'll notice that this is like a rectangle here. Whoops. I have this rectangle here that has 20 by 10, and so this is like an area, and I mentioned that before when we first started. It's like the array model, so there's 200 in here, and this is 3 times 10, that's 30 in here, if I'm looking at the area of this as a rectangle. So that's where my 200 plus 30 comes from. Okay, so let's now extend this to another multiplication problem. So let me pause it and clear and everything. Okay, so there's tons of issues with this website and trying to get the rectangles to draw. I don't know what was happening. So these are lines and, well, ellipses, but still. I have 23 here, so we're going to write down that this is 20 right here, and here's 3, okay? And I'm going to redraw this 14 times, so however far down that goes. So this line will get duplicated 14 times. This line will get duplicated 14 times. And then these three ones will get duplicated 14 times. Okay, let me do that real quick. Okay, so we have the 14 lines here. I'm going to just figure out, well, what are the areas of each of these sections? So I've got the 20 and 3 section, and then I have the 10 and 4. And I did the 10 and 4 so that way you guys could really see, actually let me do that line in a different color. So you guys could really see the divide, because 14 skinny lines drawn along is going to be kind of tough to read. So I've got 10 and 20, that's 200 right here. 20 and 4, that is, oh no, that's not 40. That's 80 here. 3 and 10 is 30, and then 3 and 4 is 12. So this adds up to 200 plus 80 plus 30 plus 12. So let me see what this would look like if I were doing this multiplication, although I should have done this written down. It doesn't actually make a difference, but I want you guys to see it as consistently as possible. This is actually 23 times 14, because I started out with a 23, so I'm going to stick with that. So I'm going to split this up, because I have 20 and 3, and I have 10 and 4. So this is going to be 20 and 3 times 10, and 20 and 3 times 4. And I'll show where that, where that's okay in just a second. So this is 200 plus 30 plus 80 plus 12. So this may look strange separating all of this out, but I want you to consider, let me pause it so I can erase that. Okay, so I want you to consider what I have multiplied out here. I'm going to do 20 times 3, that's 12. And 20, I'm sorry, not 20 times 3, so sorry, 4 times 3, and then 4 times 20 is 80, and then I have 10 times 3, that's 30, and then 10 times 20, that is 200, and then I would add all of those up. That is actually the same thing as what we have here. And if you're confused about where these multiplications came from, let's see, how can I split this for you guys again? Give me a second. Okay, so actually, to clarify really what this sum is, I can say, well, let's do it the way we normally would, where we do our regrouping. So 3 times 4, I would put a 2 here, and I put a 1 up in the top. Let me change that color. So I'd put a 1 up here, and then 2 times 4, I'd say that's an 8, and I'd add a 1 again, okay? So I would put an 8, and then I would add a 1, so I would put a 9 down here, okay? But, so this 9 is coming from an 8 and a 1, or 80 plus 10, okay? 80 right here, and then the 10 coming from there. And then I would do, let me erase that part so it's not confusing. I would do the 1 times 3. Well, first I had to put down a 0 because I've moved over a place value, because it's not just 1 times 3, it's 10 times 3. So 1 times 3 gives me a 3, there's that 30. And then a 1 times 2 gives me a 2 in this place value. There's that 200. And then of course I would add it all up. So these values that you have here, this 9 is actually a blend of this 1 and this 8. And this 23 comes from these pieces being put together. So the multiplication that you've been doing all of your life actually takes 4 values. It takes the 10s times the 10s, the 10s times the 1s, and the 10s times the 1s, which get to put together. And then it gets the 1s times the 1s. All 4 of those are compressed into these 2 digits that you've been adding together, not digits, these two values that you've been adding to create your total. In this case, it'd be 332. But that's not the important part. The important part is that you see that when you multiply, you are creating four separate areas that all add up to the same thing that you get with these two little numbers. The last thing I want to show you is the lattice algorithm. It's actually very similar to the lattice addition algorithm that we did. I do want you to note two things. Just now I said that the answer was 332, I think. It's 322, so made a mistake there. And then also, this 0 here is something that some of you may actually be leaving blank when you do these, just from a habit that you picked up at somewhere along the lines. If you ever teach this to elementary students, especially students who are seeing this for their first time, do not encourage them to leave that blank. It does work out once you're at a certain point, and people are fine with it. But if any student has bad handwriting or gets messy in a rush, they could slide this 3 over and they're missing that place value. Just for the sake of leaving that as protected as possible, essentially, so that way they can make as few mistakes as possible. Don't let them leave that blank, because then they might make errors, especially first-time learners, okay? Just a little note. All right, now we're going to do 23 times 14 in the lattice multiplication. So very much like what we did before, you're going to still work with the place value multiplications. So we're going to do 3 times 1, well that's 0, 3. And then you do 3 times 4, well that's 12. 2 times 1, that is 0, 2. And then 2 times 4, that is 0, 8. And then you add along your place values. So let me do that. So you're going to add here, and that's your first place value, plus, plus, here, plus, plus, here. Okay? So I get a 2 for my ones place. 3 plus 1 plus 8, that's 12. So I get a 2. And I'm going to carry over, let's do a different color so it doesn't blend in. I'm going to carry over a 1 and add that in. And so 1 plus 2 gets me 3. 322. I invite you to take a look at the lattice algorithm, look it up, see what people think about it, and consider why it might be beneficial for some students to learn this instead of this method, and why this isn't something that we carry on past maybe high school, maybe middle school. Just something to think about. Okay, so I'm going to make the video for division in just a second.